Senderovsky stood before the gray March heavens as if waiting to be judged, a balding man in need of a haircut. No, he couldn't do it. But returning the manuscript to the attic was out of the question now that his wife knew about the box and suspected its contents. He looked around. The property was shared by many groundhogs, but its most irascible tenant had been dubbed Steve by his daughter. Steve had an overweight, furry body modeled with orange highlights, and like a prosperous American with several condominiums, he had dug more than one cavernous hole for himself.
Hello everybody, Duke's here in Pacific Palisades, waiting for the tide to drop to see if there will be enough waves to catch a few. Of course, once that happens, it may get crowded. It's a Saturday in October, foggy on the coast, the sun's trying to punch through. There's already about 10 surfers out here, waiting for the very occasional wave that's big enough to break in high tide. The tide's dropping, which means more of them will start breaking here soon. But in the meantime, I want to welcome you to Upper Middlebrow Season 3. Season 3! And I want to let you know that our first series is a noir series proposed by Chris Bagg. And the first book we're going to be reading is The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler, which is set right here in Southern California. And I've started reading it. It's great. We're going to talk about it in a couple days here, the first half. So start reading The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler. If you're one of those people who just knows Raymond Chandler through the Humphrey Bogart movies and all the various noir parodies like Guy Noir and what else? There's so many parodies of this style. Going back to the source can be a revelation because it's good. It's good writing. The Long Goodbye. That's our next book. The other thing I want to tell you about is a number of people have asked us how they can support the show, so we have in fact started a Patreon. The goal of the Patreon is to generate enough support to cover our fixed costs, our basic operating expenses. This is a hobby podcast. We do it for fun. We do it for friendship. We do it to meet other people. We do it to learn about books and literature and learn from each other and learn from our guests, to create a practice that forces us to pay even more attention to something we love, which is reading and watching movies. But it sure would be nice if we could cover the basic expenses. It's about $1,000 a year. That includes things like web hosting, storage, Zoom accounts, buying books, that sort of thing. So if you want to help us out, follow the link in the show notes or just go to Patreon and search for Upper Middlebrow. You'll find us. All right. We're about to talk about Gary Shteyngart's 2021 novel, Our Country Friends. This was my suggestion for Chris's Chekhov series. So let's just get right into that conversation. Of course, with a little bit of baseball talk first. Yesterday I took the full day off, which is great.
Ooh,
and
wow.
I drove to Santa Cruz. And I went surfing and ate tacos in my old haunt. And
Did you see your old car? Is it still parked? Is it still
no,
parked
it was
there?
all the way to Mexico.
What was the name of your car, of that car?
Naoto.
That's what I thought. I thought it was Naoto. And I don't think
Naoto, the
it's
Mazda 323.
I always rewrite Naoto as like a Star Wars character. Like I'm like, oh yeah, Naoto is like a Rhodian who like kind of knows Greedo.
Sure.
But I don't think that's correct. I think
Naoto was a very friendly Japanese-American man who purchased my speakers from me in 1999. And,
then you reconstituted him into a car.
Yeah. Well, it's a Japanese car, so I wanted a Japanese name.
Nice. Do you remember Naoto's last name? I mean,
No.
the man, not the car.
No, I don't. For some
Listeners,
reason, Ichiguro popped into my head, but I think that's just because of Kazuo Ishiguro.
Like, oh, that's funny. You said Ishiguro. My brain leapt, of course, to Ichiro, and now we're gonna need an organ sting. And now my brain was sort of running away with the idea that you had like mistakenly or unknowingly purchased the car of Ichiro's younger, quieter, nondescript, and helpful
like cousin.
brother.
Yeah,
Naoto Ichiro.
The brother or cousin to Japan's greatest baseball player until now.
Is there a new? Do we have a new mantle for that? For the greatest Japan's greatest baseball player?
Well, I would say Shohei Ohtani is now in America, but I think prior.
I don't know him well enough. I have not been enough of a recent baseball fan to know of his exploits.
Okay, this year he batted .310, hit 54 home runs. Has 130 RBIs, and then also, maybe he didn't pitch this year.
He's a pitcher?
He's a pitcher and a batter, yeah.
What?
You didn't know that?
Well, no, you started with I wonder how many wins and losses he has. So I was like, oh, he's a pitcher. And then you started rattling off numbers that anybody would.
No, he's the greatest both sides player since Babe Ruth.
What the heck?
He's like a starting pitcher who hits 50 home runs and bats over 300. And
fuck?
He's not the best pitcher in the league, but he would be in the top 10.
That's not fair.
I can't believe you don't know about this phenomenon.
My baseball viewership has gotten a little shoddy. I've been trying to re-up it recently because I had such a good time at that Sea Dogs game. I wonder if it was sort of this 3 hours of just this very simple thing that I could just pay attention to, and it made it so much better that it was a pitcher's duel. And it was great. I mean, it was both sides were carrying. I think the Sea Dogs pitcher had a 4-hitter going, and the opposing team, I think, threw a 1-hitter. And it was
amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, it was great. And that really, I was like, gosh, baseball is wonderful. But I should know who this person is.
I mean, maybe the thing that I am struggling with is I cannot find his pitching statistics for this year. So batting, but his lifetime pitching statistics are 38 wins, 19 losses, 3.01 ERA.
Jesus.
He struck out 608 batters in 481 innings. Lifetime.
What? Is 1.5 strikeouts per inning?
Yeah. And he bats .310 and hits 50 home runs.
That's great. So if he were to go the distance, which I know doesn't happen anymore, he'd strike out 14 players. You'd get over half of the outs. That
happens. That's a standard Nolan Ryan game.
A standard Nolan Ryan game, Yeah.
Let us now recap.
All right.
So we are going to, after uncharacteristically talking about baseball for 5 minutes, we are going to now recap Our Country Friends by Gary Shteyngart. This was my suggestion for your series as a Chekhovian novel. I feel like it's holding up to that. And do you want to start with the dramatis personae, and then I'll do Act 1?
Sure, yeah. Okay, here we go. So, Alexander, known as Sasha, Senderovsky, a writer and landowner. Masha Levin Senderovsky, his wife, a psychiatric doctor. Natasha, Nat Levin Senderovsky, their child. Karen Cho, inventor of a popular phone dating application and a high school friend of Senderovsky's, that is Sasha. Vinod Mehta, a former adjunct professor and short order cook, also Senderovsky's and Karen Cho's high school friend. Ed Kim, a gentleman. D. Cameron, a writer and former student of Senderovsky's. And the actor, described by the Neue Zürcher Zeitung as the world's greatest thespian.
So that's our dramatis personae, and all of these people are assembled in upstate New York. You could call it upstate. It's Hudson Valley, right? Somewhere in the vicinity of Newburgh or Woodstock or something like that.
You have clearly never lived in New York City.
Oh, in that I would call it upstate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
but we're
it's-
talking about like 90 minutes from New York City, though, not like
if it's
6 hours.
above 125th Street, it's upstate.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have lived in New York City, but
I know,
also.
but it's a good joke.
So this is the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Think like maybe April 2020, and there's essentially. One of our characters, Sasha Senderovsky, the writer and landowner, is a professor, and he has managed to acquire a very nice house with a series of bungalows. And so he's invited his old high school buddies, plus the actor, to join, to kind of huddle down together and share company and camaraderie while the world burns, essentially. And so... Sasha's somewhat pathetic. He and his wife own this home. They are having some financial difficulty, maybe because he has purchased this incredible property and spent a lot of money renovating the bungalows so that each one has a literary or travel-oriented theme.
Yeah. Joining them, we've got Sasha's friends, Vinod, Karen, and Ed. As we said, one of Sasha's former students, a much younger woman named Dee, who has had some writing success. And a man simply named the actor. And we learned pretty quickly that Sasha is fairly desperately reliant on the actor getting a script pitched and accepted to a network for production.
Sasha has left his professor job in order to focus on writing full-time for Hollywood, and it has not. And that is a plan that could work very well, but it has not yet worked very well.
Yeah,
and so there's some stress.
You get the sense that Sasha Senderovsky is a bit of a charlatan. The descriptions of his teaching days are are somewhat alarming, and he seems to be a bit of just a fake. And he kind of, you get the sense
he
that
did publish several well-received novels. So if you can be a fake and publish several well-received novels. I mean, his biography is also, by the way, very similar to Gary Shteyngart's.
Well, then I wonder if he is truly an author insert. He is not portrayed kindly in terms of the way that he is described in the book.
All right, 50 seconds.
Yeah.
So the friends drink and raise hell, even though Masha has put all these social distancing and other rules into place. Basically, on the first night, they have a bacchanalia, and all the rules go out the door. At one point, they share a joint with each other. And there are attractions and romantic entanglements very quickly. Karen's app is an app that makes people fall in love, and it is actually used to kind of trick the actor into perhaps falling in love or infatuation with Dee. We learned that Vinod has loved Karen for years, and she's aware of it, and they're still very good friends, and she kind of likes it. And she is fond of him. Oh, we ran out of time, so I'll try to be very, very quick. Also, Ed is very clearly attracted to Dee, although the actor seems to be in line. And then I'll leave it at that. Oh, and then there's the novel. We learn that there is a novel that Vinod wrote 20 years ago. He asks Sasha if he still has it. Sasha lies and says, I can't remember, but he does remember. It's up in his attic. He knows exactly where it is. And he reveals that the novel was actually very good, but 20 years ago he read it, and because he was jealous of Vinod's writing ability, told him it was not good enough to publish. But he has held on to it, and he tries to hide it so it's not discovered by Vinod or his wife, and he hides it in a groundhog or gopher hole or something like that.
Yeah, Steve, who is... gosh, I can't remember now.
A burrowing mammal.
named Steve by Nat,
the daughter,
Masha
Nat,
and Sasha's daughter. Yeah, that's the first big secret we learned. The other one is that the actor, in a moment of kind of like bathing hilarity, gets a bunch of like gnarly conditioner in his eyes, kind of wanders out amongst the bungalows naked, yelling for help. Masha helps him, takes him naked into her house, gets him in the shower, cleans him off, and they have a sexual encounter there.
Yes.
So Yeah.
She gives him a hand, as he says later.
Exactly. And then also just kind of hovering around the bungalows is a kind of aura of trouble. There is a black pickup truck that seems to be observing the Senderovskis and their guests.
Yep. And Sasha and Masha are high alert as sort of city Jews, liberals who feel somewhat unwelcome in this country place. And there is a sense that they're a bit paranoid because they mistake the U.S. Marine emblem for a white nationalist symbol at one point. But then again, I think from the author's point of view, the paranoia is also not entirely unjustified.
Yeah,
that there might actually be some white nationalism in the neighbors around them. But yeah, that's the first half. There are 4 acts in this play, and those were the first 2 acts.
Yeah.
And so my first question for you is, what do you think? I've read this novel. I suggested it. What do you, Chris Bagg, think of the idea of creating an overtly Chekhovian story? A bunch of bougie people gather in the woods and making it a contemporary pandemic novel.
Yeah.
How does that strike you?
I think it's great. and so the reason I think it's great is because, like, you know, a lot of the time, and maybe I can appeal to your sort of like your very sensible mistrust of MFA programs. Because I think that in the hands of a less experienced or just lesser author, that author might be inclined to try to like cover up the illusion and sort of hide it and be like, oh, maybe a few people will like get it. You know, maybe somebody will understand the depth of my elusive abilities. And Shteyngart's like, no, fuck it. It's a play. Like, I am. And then he's like, not only am I going to make it 4 acts, I'm going to make, you know, several of the characters Russian. I am going to give the female Russian character the female name that Chekhov uses, I think, in 3 out of 4 of the big 4 plays. Like, he's like, I'm just going to go with Masha. And then he even has Vinod go and grab a copy of Uncle Vanya from one of the bungalows. He lays it on really thick, but he's not laying it on thick to cover something up. He's, I think, laying it on thick because he's mostly like, no, this is the perfect setting for a Chekhovian novel, which is going to tie into my trivia later.
Ooh, interesting. Interesting. Yeah, and I have to say, you know, I read this and I had not read any of the plays. I'd read a couple of Chekhov's short stories, and I hadn't read, it's a Chekhovian novel, and even with my limited knowledge of Chekhov, that was obvious to me. You know, I was able to pick it up from the various allusions that I recognized. And I think, you know, I don't know, I agree with you. I think it works really, really well. And I think part of why it works is he's telling us this is going to be one of those stories that's about love, failed love, unrequited love, disappointment, romance, flawed people who are not entirely unsympathetic. That's the stakes. It's, you know, it's not going to be a story about stopping the COVID pandemic. It's not going to be a story about like who killed the person in the town and did the white nationalists do it. It's going to be one of those stories. And I don't know, somehow it worked really well for me. And I often don't like stories where there's little plot and the characters are so flawed. I often struggle with stories like that. And I did not struggle in this case. Maybe because I felt, again, this is one of those moments where I felt the ambition of the novel was clearly articulated and the scope and the ambition are well matched.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Gary Shteyngart is a very, very, very good writer.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of great sentences.
Yeah. And you know, I think it kind of gets into my next question, which is like, you know, if you think about a novel that is plot heavy, how much history do you need if your novel is very plot heavy? Like if the unfolding of the novel is mostly about what happens, like how much history do you need of the characters?
If it's plot heavy, I would say in most cases you do not need a lot of history unless the plot extends into the past.
Okay, how much history is between these characters?
A lot.
Oh my God.
A whole lot.
One of the central pleasures of reading the first half of this book I found was being like, when am I going, like, to paraphrase a great congressman, what did you know and when did you know it?
Yeah. Explain the context of that paraphrase.
Yeah, well, like, as you were reading it, were you kind of cataloging the, like, oh, that's going to be a problem?
Yeah. Well, I think within the first two acts, you get what is sort of like, not a love triangle, but like a love duodecahedron. And sometimes that love is like brotherly love, or
I tried to diagram it.
Oh, you
couldn't.
tried to diagram it?
I couldn't. It got too messy too fast.
There aren't that many characters, but each one of them has a specific relation to each other character. And Shteyngart knows exactly what those relationships are, and he doles them out in an order. I don't know how well planned this was, but it feels like the right order. Mm-hmm. I remember when I read this, I was instantly drawn into the first scene, which is Sasha sort of excitingly doing errands and picking up Ed at the train station, and then they go and buy a ridiculous amount of food and wine, and then they come back, and then there's this ridiculously well-written subtextual conversation between Ed and Masha about the COVID protocols, and you're already seeing the battle lines being drawn. Mm-hmm. And then it's a little bit slower with Vinod and with Karen, but by the end of the second act, you see what's emotionally at stake for both of them mm-hmm. as well. And that essentially we are thrown in media res in the middle of what, hopefully for these characters' sake will be something like a 70-year relationship, and we're on like year 30 of that relationship. And we're in the midst of all of this. There's a lot of internality, Mm-hmm. He's not doing any kind of Hemingway, and that's also what's different about this versus reading a Chekhov play. Is he tells you exactly what the characters are thinking at all times. And part of maybe the pleasure of a Chekhov play is you have to deduce it. Mm-hmm. Part of the frustration of reading a Chekhov play is you don't have any idea what they're thinking, and it just seems like nonsense some of the time until it's contextualized for you. To me, it actually, in the same way that both of the Chekhov plays we have read, I find my attention becoming fixated around one character, and often it's not the most active character. I found by Act 2 my attention becoming fixating around Vinod, because Vinod has these two great unfulfilled dreams that by the middle of the second act we start to sense might actually be within reach. And one is he always wanted to write a great novel, and we learned he did. His supposed best friend suppressed it, which is monstrous. And then the other thing is that he loves Karen, and we start getting the sense that even though Karen is attracted to the actor, there's a moment where she starts to wonder, like, maybe I don't pity him anymore. Mm-hmm. Maybe something's changing in that relationship. And so to me, Vinod becomes the center of our greatest hopes. Mm-hmm. And then all of the other characters, but we learn sort of the backstory of Dee and her relationship to Sasha the professor. We sort of learn the history of Masha and Sasha's romance. Masha is also really concerned with the well-being of their daughter Nat, who has some neuro issues that she's dealing with. And so, all of that history becomes incredibly important, and the novel would feel incredibly thin without it, because about 5 things happen in the first half of the novel.
Well, like we're back in reading a Chekhov play. It's so neatly matched to the everybody arrives. Act 2. Nothing happens isn't totally correct, because Masha giving the actor a hand job in the shower.
There's some happening.
And Sasha burying the book.
And burying the novel. This does have more action than the Chekhov play. But in a way that I think helps.
But it's so, the action is so Chekhovian. You know, it's like people doing small, hidden, illicit things.
Yeah.
And I mean, because, you know, we've talked about this already, the drama of Chekhov is when other people witness the shitty behavior. You know, it's Vanya coming back into the room when Astrov and Yelena are kissing. You know, it's Lopakin smashed, you know, finally getting to announce that he bought the orchard. You know, it's like, so yeah, more happens. But I think, you know, like what you said about the frustration of reading a play, you know, last time we talked about Chekhov writes this beautiful two-dimensional like thing, and then somehow the actors make it three-dimensional. And I think that's what Shteyngart is kind of doing for his own book. He has like created the two-dimensional history, and then the novel kind of erects it into place.
Totally. And I think like it makes me wonder for the people who read Chekhov plays and love them, are they doing that work in their head? Like, does reading a Chekhov play on the page feel as three-dimensional and as dramatic as this novel feels to me?
It's a great question. I mean, like, I think.
Or do you need the performance? Do you need the theater and the actors and the director to unfold it into the third dimension?
I hope not, but I think that the population that can read the play and just like luxuriate in it is pretty small. And I don't think it's like, it's not me. Like I still need the performance and the director and the actors and all that stuff to realize it. But like, yeah, I think there's probably a few people that can just read Chekhov and like understand the glory and the brilliance of it. Whereas most of us would need to see it in a good production to get it.
Let me ask you, this is an improvised question, but same question you asked me about Vanya last time.
Okay.
Does this novel transcend, specifically does Sasha, who you've noted is deeply flawed, but is kind of like the main character in a way?
Yep.
If this play were to be called Uncle Somebody, it would be called Uncle Sasha. Like, if this were the Cherry Orchard, he would be Lyubov Reneskaya. If this were Uncle Vanya, he would be Uncle Vanya. Does his character transcend absurd tragic comediness and achieve pathos for you?
Right now, I kind of hate him.
Yeah,
I'm only halfway through.
Yeah.
I find the sort of degree of his like his self-inflicted tawdriness to be frustrating, and just the I mean, like Masha nails it when she says something like, "What
you
are
don't
you
love anybody?"
or what are you hiding from your so-called friend?"
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, that's his wife.
Yeah.
His wife, like, is saying that to him. I mean, he is something of a worm.
Yep.
I suspect, given how good Shteyngart is, that I am going to be surprised by how that unfolds in the second half of the novel. At the moment, my sympathies lie with Vinod.
Yeah.
I think that Vinod is the Vanya character because in Vanya is realizing that his benefactor is just an idiot.
Yeah.
And I think that Sasha and Professor Serebrakov from Vanya are similar characters, kind of blowhardy academics. Sasha does have this kind of winsome Jay Gatsby-esque, like, everything's going to work out. Like, let's have a party.
Yeah. I mean, I think the quality he has that might be admirable is he does really seem to want the people he loves most in this world around him in this crisis.
Yeah.
But he lies and manipulates, uses people, deceives them in order to achieve that. And so I think for his character to achieve any kind of pathos, you would also hope that it would achieve growth, which is something that rarely seems to happen in the Chekhov plays. But maybe this novel, well, I know it's going to happen, but
I'm curious to see what you think of the second half. But I'd like to do a quick reading.
Awesome.
This was just a moment I really, really liked. It's also, you alluded to this earlier. This is the moment where Vinod, I think is how that's said, comes into the actor's cottage looking for a copy of Uncle Vanya. So this has happened on my, I have a Kindle version, so I don't know the page number. He's come in, the actor is just post-hand job, I think, and is sort of like reflecting on that experience. And the actor very quickly reverts to like self-pity and resentment, sort of like Sasha. They both are kind of similar in that regard. So he's just in the cottage, Vinod has come, and he spots it on the shelf and walks over and grabs it. And then to make conversation, he says, I believe I saw you in a very avant-garde version of The Cherry Orchard in Berlin once, Vinod said. Yes, the actor said, when I was much younger. I played the actual orchard, if I remember correctly, or the personification of it. Very tough role, but you carried it off with aplomb. The actor smiled and waved away the compliment. I'm just a vessel. Chekhov was the genius. He hadn't meant it as a question. It must be exciting to collaborate with Sasha, Vinod continued. Exciting is not the first word that comes to mind. He's a great writer. I've been lucky to see him grow over the years. I even tried my own hand at writing a novel once, and he was kind enough to read it and give advice. He's a teacher at heart. The actor was touched by the earnestness of Vinod's friendship. He rarely saw the same affection among men in his own circles. You would make a terrific Uncle Vanya, by the way, Vinod said. The compliments felt soothing to the actor because they seemed to come from a place of real non-competitiveness. Unlike Senderovsky, his friend had compliments to spare and no need to constantly prove himself. He watched Vinod glide over to the bookshelf by the map of the Leningrad metro and pluck out the mentioned volume. Actually, the actor said, I always wanted to play the self-entitled professor who comes to visit Vanya and his family, the one who owns the estate. Can't remember the name offhand. Sarah Brakoff. Yes! My stay with Senderovsky might really ground me in that character. He felt very erudite to be having this conversation.
Managing to write a passage where you're doing a lot of telling and the telling becomes a kind of showing is just fucking remarkable.
What do you mean by that?
So he felt very erudite to be having this conversation.
Right.
So Shteyngart is coming right out and telling us what the actor is feeling. If we're reading clearly, we're like, okay, you're not erudite. The professor does not own the estate. You're fucking wrong. And you're just a pretentious tool. And I was laughing earlier on because of the I played the actual orchard or the personification of it. Like, I'm sorry. I have sat through far too many heavy-handed and avant-garde productions of pieces of theater that don't need any additional seasoning. I remember seeing a production of The Cherry Orchard where there was a bunch of fucking windows in the floor of the stage. And I'm not quite sure what they were reaching for, but they kept referring to the Cherry Orchard as down there, and I was like, is this just a really poorly thought through kind of emotional placing
to the afterlife?
Or hell or something like that.
Yeah.
It was just, but it was neither, it wasn't set up correctly. And so the actor is sort of a pretentious turd.
Yeah.
And you see that through his kind of affection for Vinod, because Vinod is just kind of being nice to the actor. He's just kind of soothing his ego.
Yes, I agree. And I also think there might even be another layer, which I'm not sure about. But when Vinod says, you would make a terrific Uncle Vanya, by the way, Vinod does seem like a nice guy, but he also seems wise. And I wonder if he's basically saying if that's actually a compliment or if it's an insult. And if he's actually trolling the actor because he recognizes the actor is hungry for compliments and he gives him what the actor takes as a compliment. But if I were to say to you, oh, you'd be perfect for Uncle Vanya, I'm not sure you would take that as a compliment.
Yeah. I mean, like I share a high degree of empathy with Vanya, but I don't want to.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Vanya is a aging, less attractive than he was in youth, person who's wasted his life, who's consumed by anger and jealousy, who complains bitterly and does nothing about it until his complaints become so unbearable that he tries to kill somebody.
It messes that up too.
And that messes that up too. And then what does he do? To solve all that, he just goes back to the way things were, maybe a little bit more miserable than before. And so, you'd make a terrific Uncle Vanya. Maybe that's a compliment. Or maybe Vinod is telling us, you're a total jackass, and I can tell. And the actor takes it as a compliment. And then, also, there is a kind of childlike innocence. This entire time, Vinod thinks that Sasha has done him a favor by telling him 20 years ago, hey, I read your novel. It's not really good. I wouldn't send it out to a publisher. We learn in a flashback that this crushes Vinod, but he still claims and feels grateful to Sasha for this. If he discovers what really happened, which is that Sasha was jealous and didn't want to compete with his friend, he would probably be outrageously angry.
Yeah.
And then I think a little bit of a plot point, too, is that Karen, along with Nat, actually deduces that Sasha has hidden the novel and has started to read it, and she remembers that Sasha suppressed it, and we have the sense that Karen's on the case and might figure it out. Yeah. Karen's a pretty fun character.
She is, yeah. I really enjoy her. And I think one of the things I most enjoy about her is that I don't yet know how I feel about her.
Yeah.
You see, she is a champion with Nat. She is so good with Nat. And even in her moments of kind of like getting it wrong, she does the responsible adult thing of just like kind of continuing forward and like talking to the kid. And
part of that is it's her biological clock, right? She has resolved to being childless, and she's about 50, and has some regret about that, and that's part of why she's interacting with Nat the way she is.
So, every now and then we do this sort of like literary device deep dive. And we've done tone before because, as you know, tone is the one that like drives me nuts because people confuse tone with mood or atmosphere all the time. So we're not going to talk about tone. We're going to talk about mood or atmosphere. The general emotional timbre of a piece of writing. What would you describe as the mood of this novel? And then give me sort of like the greatest hits of how you're kind of arriving there. Like not greatest hits, but like what are the things you would point to be like, oh, it's blank because of blank, that sort of thing.
I find the mood to be light because it is so clearly satire and the characters' foibles are all turned up to 11. And even Sasha's own sort of internality narration of himself, his first person, he seems to be satirizing himself, right? Like the one thing you'd give him credit for is he does not have an inflated view of his own integrity. And so I find it to be light because it's funny and because there's a lot of dramatic irony that has me chuckling. Sasha is apparently a terrible driver. He's only learned to drive in like the last 2 years.
I love that.
And he drives around like a madman, like in these country roads, shaking his fist at people, which is dangerous and bad behavior, but it's funny. When Ed shows up, and Ed is this like well-heeled, well-dressed gentleman, and Masha, who's very concerned about COVID, is asking him about his travels. And he's like, oh, I haven't been to too many places, and then proceeds to spend like 7 minutes naming the 7 places he's visited in like the last 3 months, you know, and you just it's just like it's an anticipation beat, because you're anticipating Masha has erected this structure of safety and rules, and we can see where that's going with Ed's sort of disdain for them. And so all of that's really funny, even though it's all very depressing and dark. You know, they are engaging in dangerous behavior, potentially. COVID is real. Vinod has only one lung. And we've seen an infidelity already occur. Sasha's on the verge of financial ruin. He's in trouble financially. He is deceiving his best friend Vinod. The actor is kind of a psychopath at this point.
Totally.
He seems to have no regard for anything or anybody and is incredibly egocentric. Dee is this kind of beautiful firecracker, but is kind of politically and emotionally naive too, and seems to enjoy the attention she's getting from all the men. I was thinking about it today. There's a scene. I went back and read the first chapter, and I was walking home to my place I'm staying, and there's a scene that I find hilarious where Ed and Sasha go to like the local organic butcher that's run by 2 former NYC models who are now organic butchers, and they buy something like $130 worth of like meats and cheeses and sardines and liquor bottles, and Sasha's nervous about the money. Ed has plenty of money, and they go to the counter and they both like pretend to not see the bill. They're doing the sort of chicken game of like, if I pretend to not notice, you'll pay for it. And I was just like, this is really funny, and I recognize all these people, but my actual friends have much greater character than this. And maybe I'm lucky, because actually when I get together with my friends, you have to be fast if you want to be the one who buys the goods. You know? And cut to like 3 hours later in the action, you know, a scene or two later, and Ed and Karen and Sasha are all sharing a joint, like, you know, getting their saliva in each other's mouths on the porch while Masha is watching in horror above and in anger and frustration. Also, all the women in the play masturbate and fantasize about the actor the first night. And then the men all fantasize about one of the women.
About Dee,
and so all of these things are moments that I think keeps the mood light, yet still tragicomic.
That's
like lightly dark. Is that a mood? Lightly dark.
I think that's tragicomedy, right? That's where the light. I think it's a great answer. I think we are on the different sides of the same coin, because you've gone to the sort of comedy first, and like, if I were to describe the sort of emotional like timbre of this work, I think I would say something like nascent violent anxiety. You know, like, that's the feeling that I get, characterized by, there's some really great passages of Nat's interiority about like what it might be like to be a neurodivergent child, that I think are rendered. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So like Nat and like both Sasha and Masha have taken Nat to like tons of different diagnostics, and like nothing seems to stick except for this kind of massive generalized anxiety disorder. Right. And I think that's what I would describe as the mood of this novel, is generalized anxiety disorder. And especially with the neighbors and the black pickup with the headlights that just kind of creeps along the road. The dead trees that are just like dropping rotten tree limbs on the lawn, like over and over again. Like, the water doesn't work. Like, it's so great that you're seeing like a comedy that is shot through with darkness, and I'm seeing a tragedy that is shot through with like light and comic moments. So I think it's the same, but I love that we're slightly different on it.
I wonder if that's simply because I've already read it.
I wonder, and that makes sense.
Even in a horror movie that you've seen, the jump scares don't bother you as much as they do the first time. Even though you know something terrible is going to happen to that character, the knowledge of it then removes the suspense. And therefore, when Jack Nicholson, spoiler, kills Scatman Carruthers with an axe, which is a horrific moment in The Shining.
Yeah.
Once you've seen that once, I've watched that movie 3 or 4 times, I still feel sympathy and sadness for that character who I like, but it's no longer horrific the way it was the first time I saw it. It's interesting, too, because I think I've alluded to this before, but over 10 years ago, I dated a really wonderful person who was in an MFA program, and I felt that many of the people in the MFA program, including some of her professors, were people who remind me a lot of the characters in this novel. Full of petty jealousies, ambition, dismissive of people who didn't share their level of success, jealous of people who had greater success, plotting and scheming against each other, romantically unfaithful, dishonest, all of these things. Not everybody in this program was like that, but many of the people were, and all of their stories were about people like that. And I got really sick of stories about literary people behaving badly. And I was just like, and it also kind of filtered into my sort of like suspicion of the literary genre. And I remember I saw a talk one time where Orson Scott Card said, all literary novels are middle-aged professors having affairs with like 26-year-old students. And you're like, he's not entirely wrong about that. I mean, he is wrong. It's not literally the case, but there is, if you think about Philip Roth and The
Even
World According to Garp.
Yeah, Blue Angel, like a book that I love. That's exactly the plot of that novel.
There's a lot of that out there, and there's a lot of jealousy, and there's a lot of pettiness, and somehow, maybe it's just the time that passed, or maybe it's the particular charm of Gary Shteyngart's just razor-focused set pieces. It's not just, it's the sentences and the set pieces. It's like the way Ed Yu is dressed. It's the app that takes a picture of two people and makes it seem like they've fallen in love through an AI algorithm. There's something about the precision of those details that just made it all a little more fun for me. And then maybe part of it too is that you do have a couple of genuinely good characters. Like Vinod there's nothing to dislike about Vinod, right?
Exactly.
And Karen, there's very little to dislike about her. And also I think the thing that Chekhov does well is all the characters, except maybe at this point the actor, have something likable about them too. So I don't know, but when I first started reading it, it did not bother me as much as this kind of novel usually does. And I don't quite know what to make of that.
I think you're right that it's Steingart's
Precision?
Compassion. Both. I think it's both his precision and his compassion.
Yeah.
He's what is the baseball player?
He's satirizing himself, right?
Right. What's the baseball player that you told me about at the beginning of this?
Ohtani?
Right. Yeah. So Shteyngart is kind of Ohtani. He's like, he has both the compassion for these characters and the fucking writerly precision to hit 300.
He's pitching and he's hitting.
He's pitching and he's hitting.
Yeah.
You got a question here about internality.
Yeah, well, and you sort of addressed it too, but you pointed out earlier that essentially the tool that Shteyngart uses is to take the two-dimensionality of a Chekhov play and make it this three-dimensional story. I think one of the tools, anyway, is the internality. We actually know what the characters are thinking. Yeah. So when the characters say something kind of strange in the Chekhov play, you're like, wait, why is he talking about carrying a gun around all the time? Or like, why does he keep talking about billiards? What does that have to do with anything? Or all of those sort of moments, a lot of times they just sort of land and you're like, that was a weird thing for that person to say. I don't get it. I move on. But in this case, I feel like in this novel, you sort of always understand what the characters are thinking and feeling. Do you like that? Yes. And is there anything about it are there any moments where you would like to sort of zoom out in a sort of Hemingway-esque way? Or is this is it the right level of internality for you?
I mean, I think he probably had to do it this way, though no, he didn't, because like Hemingway does this all the time and does it very well. But
It'd be hard though, because with Hemingway, usually you're like love triangle,
there's like three characters.
Three characters, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, if we're gonna do like Hills Like White Elephants, which, you know, is what gets trotted out all the time as like, okay, like this is the prototype, like the stereotypical Hemingway genius of like, we're never gonna say the thing, we're just gonna talk around it, and you're gonna get the thing. It's just two people at a train depot with like a few very important tiny other details. I think when you have a cast this big and you are comfortable flitting between third person limited perspectives, I don't think you can do it any other way with the internality. And I think the way I don't know why I'm thinking culinary terms tonight. I think the seasoning that Shteyngart employs really well are those deeply ironic kind of doubling moments where he is using his telling as an additional manner of showing, where he's going to like tell us what a character is feeling, and yet we interpret something else from that. It's like, oh, okay, if the actor is feeling comfortable, actually, it's just it's not a good thing that he's feeling comfortable. It's because like the little dogs of his ego are being stroked. Yeah. You know, and like, so I think
that's a good point. Yeah.
Like
I don't disagree. I normally sort of consider the Hemingway approach to be the higher craft approach. But I think you're right. I can't imagine understanding this tangled web of relationships without this degree of being within the character's emotional life.
I've got a reading which maybe will wrap some of this up for us.
Sure. I think I just thought of one final question I want to ask after your reading.
Okay, cool. This is the moment when Sasha is going to go bury the book. You know what? I'm just going to say really quickly, I love Shteyngart's, like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the MacGuffin and I'm going to literally fucking bury it.
It reminds me of our discourse on the arrest when we're like, what literary device should Jonathan Lethem use to get his character in California to his other characters in Maine? And we're like, it's not a literary device.
No, it's an actual tank.
Goddamn tank.
Yeah.
Nuclear power and espresso. And yeah, the same thing. How does he bury his friend's novel and suppress it, bury it so that the eyes of time will never see it? He buries the novel.
Exactly, yeah. So, all right.
Right, and we should say this is like probably at like 3 a.m. or something like that.
Yeah, it's the middle of the night. He's probably still somewhat drunk and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Senderovsky stood amid the felled white branches, death all around him, Vinode's novel snug in its box as it had been for 2 decades. The garbage can sat at the end of the driveway, covered in dew, waiting for pickup. If he carried out his plan, Vinode's words would be lost forever. Senderovsky ruminated over that fact. How he hated his dressing gown right now and all that it represented, the sniveling, the posing. All of it was the very opposite of Vinode's novel, a portrait of his parents when they were university students in India, when they were still in love. That rare, impossible thing. A young man's novel about a subject not himself. Senderovsky stood before the gray March heavens as if waiting to be judged, a balding man in need of a haircut. No, he couldn't do it. But returning the manuscript to the attic was out of the question now that his wife knew about the box and suspected its contents. He looked around. The property was shared by many groundhogs, but its most irascible tenant had been dubbed Steve by his daughter. Steve had an overweight, furry body modeled with orange highlights, and like a prosperous American with several condominiums, he had dug more than one cavernous hole for himself. He summered by the one near the pool, at times actually flopping himself out on the pool deck in a happy rodent stupor. During the leaner months, he lived by the Christmas trees flanking the west perimeter of the property, from whose delicious sweet roots he would make winter meals. It was this hole Senderovsky approached now, with the Tiva sandals box under his arm.
It's amazing that this is the only Shteyngart novel I've read. I mean, I feel like his prose it's like right up there with like Chabon, Lethem, Franzen. Like we're that level of sentence crafting.
It's such a bummer. He ends up being the jack of all trades of that crew.
Yeah.
Of the like Jennifer Egan, Franzen, David Foster Wallace, George Saunders, like Chabon, like each of them has a thing that they do, and Shteyngart can do most of them.
Yeah,
and I think that like he's like
the Ong Lee.
Exactly. There you go. Like. I mean, I was gonna like if David Foster Wallace is the one who can, get 1.5 strikeouts per inning and hit 300. Like Shteyngart is like, is like a career 270 second baseman who steals 35 bases a season. Like you're like, no, I want that guy on my team.
And turns to double play.
Do you remember what his name is?
Yeah.
Like that is, I mean, and that's the bummer about. I've read Super
Sad Love Story.
I think True is in there too.
Yeah, Super Sad True Love Story or something.
Yeah, something like that.
You notice that Dee's collection of essay has a Shteyngart-like title.
Oh yeah, totally.
What is it?
No, yeah. I'm just that particular sentence. About the Steve had an overweight furry body modeled with orange highlights. Totally normal. Great start. Yeah. Totally fine. And like a prosperous American with several condominiums, he had dug more than one cavernous hole for himself. Just so freaking good. Like the cavernous is doing so much work there.
Yeah. My last question is, if Act 2 is more or less nothing happens, although in this case there definitely was a few, as we've noted, it's more like not much happens. Then Act 3 is going to be everything happens.
Yeah.
What do you have any predictions or guesses as to what everything is in this novel?
Okay, predictions. Vinod finds out about the hidden novel. Masha's secret about the actor gets out. Dee sleeps with the actor instead of Ed. And the black pickup truck with the creepy headlights turns out to be less of a problem than what the story is preparing us for. Like, those are sort of the everything happens that I think might occur. I don't really have Nat is definitely going to be wrapped up in this somehow. Maybe there's a confrontation between Masha and Karen. But those are my big predictions for Act 3.
Listener, read on to find out if Chris Bagg is accurate in his predictions.
What a segue.
So let's go to trivia.
Yeah.
I think I go first this time.
Yes, I believe you're the host today.
So, early on, we learned that Sasha and Masha met at a kind of rural camp for Soviet Russian Jewish refugees, probably in the 80s when they were teenagers. And I was reading about such a camp run by a woman in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s named Alla Feldman, or Aya Feldman, but Alla Feldman. And she would do similar rural retreats in Big Bear for Soviet Russian Jewish immigrants. So according to the LA Times, which of the following activities was not on the roster at one of these Soviet Russian Jewish retreats?
Okay.
A, Talmudic commentary. B, dinner musical theater. C, the disco mixer. Or D, Jeopardy-themed singles nights.
I'm going to go with D, Jeopardy-themed trivia nights.
That's a buzz. It was dinner musical theater. But
that was my previous guess until I heard the Jeopardy thing, because the time frame didn't quite seem to line up for me.
Jeopardy started in the early 80s, I think.
Okay. Okay.
But that was a hard one, and I gave you 4 choices. So in Sasha Like Guilt, I'm going to give you a bonus question, and if you get this right, you can replace your buzz with a ding.
Excellent.
What traumatic event occurred in young Gary Shteyngart's life after immigrating to the United States?
Oh, no.
Was it A, botched circumcision, B, he was enrolled in a Catholic school because they accepted immigrants for free and was promptly bullied for being Jewish. Or C, he fell off a second-story fire escape in Brighton Park, Brooklyn.
Oh, God damn it. B.
Enrolled in the Catholic school. No, he in fact suffered a botched circumcision, which he wrote about in the New Yorker.
Oh, poor Gary Shteyngart.
Yeah.
Oh.
He no longer, he says he no longer experiences any major pain. No.
Is Gary Shteyngart in his 50s?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, apparently he had 2 years of painful urination, which is terrible.
Yeah, that would be awful.
Yeah, and it was all because a bunch of Chabadniks is what the term he used, follower of a particular rabbi, came door to door in his house in Brooklyn and knocked on all the doors and is like, do you have any young Jews who've recently emigrated from Russia where they don't circumcise people? Because the Soviets didn't circumcise because of, their anti-religious policy. And his father foolishly said yes. So then he was whisked off to the temple for the bris, and they did not do a good job.
God, I was sort of imagining in this story that they were like, great, we're coming in.
At age 7. Yeah, no, that's how you would film it, right?
Yeah,
the guy's just like, great, and pulls out the bris knife,
just pushes past Gary Shteyngart. The shot is over Gary Steingart's shoulder, so you get the Hababnik, and then he's like, excellent, and it's definitely played by. Oh, come on. John Goodman.
Yeah. He'd be terrifying.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, my God.
We're coming in.
With a huge beard and a giant black hat. Oh, yeah. Shot low, the poor kid peeking around the corner.
Yes, of course, shot low. It's from his perspective.
It's from his perspective. Oh, poor guy. I'm going to pour a little bit of liquor out for Gary Shteyngart tonight.
Okay.
I even feel guilty that we laughed about it, but he did write about it in the New Yorker. That's a terrible thing to do to a child.
He was 7.
He was 7.
God, no. Oh, God. Yeah.
But because that was a bonus question, you only got 1 buzz.
Thanks.
We will not buzz the second question.
Okay.
There will merely be the silence of failure.
The silence of failure? Oh, yeah. Boy. Haven't experienced that enough. Chekhov produced a remarkable amount of writing in his life, but only 1 novel, which was published serially when he was 25. So you got to sit with me here. I'm going to do a very quick summary of a fairly complicated plot.
Okay.
So it is a framed narrative in which an unnamed author begs a Moscow publisher to read and publish his manuscript. The publisher agrees to at least read the work, and then we get into the main activity of the novel, which tells the story of an estate forester's daughter in a provincial Russian village who is stabbed to death in the woods during a hunt, and the efforts to uncover her killer. Was this early longer work of Chekhov's called A, a stabbing, B, the shooting party, or C, a manuscript?
Oh. First of all, I just love the idea of a Chekhovian murder mystery. I love. It's like not only is it a framed novel, it's a genre within a genre.
Yeah.
It's like one of the characters on Star Trek is murdered, and Data has to figure it out.
Apparently, Agatha Christie read this particular work at some point and was like, "Whoa, cool!" It has actually influenced other later mystery writers.
The parlor mystery, suspicion falling on each party in turn, and a surprise reveal at the end. That's amazing. I don't think it's a stabbing. A manuscript is plausible, and there's a part of me that thinks maybe Chekhov would have been stupid enough to name it that, but I suspect it was called The Shooting Party.
You are correct. I
didn't know, although I do. That does sort of ring a bell, so maybe I'd heard about it. But also, it just feels like that's what you would refer to a bunch of people going hunting in an estate forest in Russia in 1906.
I'm trying
party.
to put the 1925 cover of it into the chat. And there's one detail about this cover that I just love.
I didn't know he had written a novel at all.
There
Oh
you
my
go.
God.
Yeah.
The husband killed his wife. How stupid you are. Wait, does the cover have a spoiler?
It doesn't. Because what turns out, and like this is from reading, I haven't read the book, this is from reading the Wikipedia entry, that we learn in a postscript that the actual murderer is the author who drops the manuscript off with the Moscow publisher.
That's great.
So it's like the framing of Nabokov. It's the framing it's like the framing of Lolita, where we
That's great, actually. That's and it reminds me of like the Jasper Ford books that Leah Jones is like always recommending at us.
I know we gotta do that.
Like-
we gotta do that.
Oh yeah. I think I'll read them at some point. That my parents say that those are good too.
And but next up, in this particular timescape, is the second half of Gary Shteyngart's Our Country Friends, which was published in 2021.
Well, Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the former models turned organic butchers.
Yes, we are.
We sort of are. Ben Pajak, music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Ben Pajak, who I'm going to see this weekend. Design and website by Chris Bagg, who I'm not going to see this weekend. You can learn more about us and find our listener survey at uppermiddlebrow.com. And please review us in your podcast app so other people can find the show. By the way, we have now 9 survey respondents. All we need is one more, and we can stop talking about it.
Please help us out. But as a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.